take a seat and let me welcome you here today at this very special occasion with our very special guest. Let me first introduce you, if you've never been here. Where are we right now? We are in Progress Bar. Progress Bar is actually the very first hackerspace in Slovakia. Vitalik Buterin was here in 2013. People who are here are mostly core tech people and developers. And yeah, I got really fancy microphone. This is like be yourself culture of the spaces, you know. So that's what we do here, besides other hardware. As you all may know, we are operating right now as a co-working place. So just a little shameless plug. We got few seats free. So if you would like to sit here in the center of the town in this beautiful space, just come to us and we'll handle that from that. And we are always looking for people to help us with this space and with the non-profit and with searching for sponsors. So any human initiative is actually very welcome. So let me first introduce our guests. Our first guest, Vlad Zamfir. He's a researcher and developer best known for his work on crypto economics, proof of stake and blockchain charting. Since 2014, Zamfir has been a researcher with the Ethereum Foundation, a non-profit organization that supports the development of Ethereum platform. He's a leading researcher of the Casper protocol upgrade. Please make some applause. Our other special guest is Amir Taaki. Amir created the first full re-implementation of the Bitcoin protocol named Bitcoin, worked on Bitcoin client Electrum, and created other command line utilities around Bitcoin and the network. The Bitcoin standardization procedure, as all you may know, Bitcoin Improvement Proposal, or BIPs, was actually started by Taaki. Halpin, visiting researcher at INRIA de Paris, where he lead the Next Leap project, and research scientist at the Socio-Technical Systems Research Center at MIT on blockchain technology. He's interested in data science, cryptography, standards, philosophy of the web, and he's all-around radical about open internet. And the last special guest is from our community, Matej Galvanek. Matej is investment director of fundamental research-based crypto fund and co-founder of cryptkit.com. Matej started as a professional poker player and got to Bitcoin early because of its usefulness in online poker. He has a soft spot for privacy coins, zero-knowledge proofs, and is a proponent of crypto anarchist values. Okay, so the topic of this discussion is politics of crypto anarchy and governance. So let me go through the governance of this meetup right now. So we will have a discussion about the topic of governance. It's an open discussion, so if anyone from you from audience would like to raise a question or have some interesting opinion, you have two ways how you can pose a question. First, you can use sliding. Just put in there slide.do/progress and you can ask the questions from your browsers. Or if you would like to ask the question personally, just raise your hand and I will come to you with a microphone and we'll handle that from that point. So, let me start. In the beginning, I'd like to start with the definition of the governance, because few of you might not even know what that word actually means and why that word is important in blockchains. So usually the Wikipedia definition is like, governance is the way rules, norms, and actions are structured, regulated, and held accountable. Okay. Governance may take many forms. For instance, a government may operate as a democracy, or a non-profit organization or corporation may be governed by a small board of directors. All of it is governance. But we want to talk about the governance in blockchains. So my first question for this discussion is, how do you think that blockchain governance is different from corporate or state governance?
Well, that's a good question. It's quite different in a number of ways, because the nature of the thing that we're making decisions on is like software running in a distributed network, and software that's like open source and available in on like GitHub, usually in like our case, unfortunately. So because the decisions are on open source software and on nodes that run that software and on people's like interfaces to that software, the fundamental decisions that are involved are quite different in blockchain governance than like democracy or corporate governance. In democracy and corporate governance, on the other hand, we have a clear idea of who the stakeholders are, like the citizens who get to vote, or not the stakeholders, but the actual participants, like, the citizens who get to vote, or like the shareholders. Whereas in blockchain governance, it's not so clear, and it's not so easy for us to say like, who should get a vote, and how many votes should any person get. Whereas like in corporate governance or democracy, that's like a relatively much easier problem. So those are some ways that it's different. I'm sure there are others, and that we can get opinions. Anyone?
So for me, the main distinction would be that both like state governance and corporate governance has a strong support of like legal enforcement and legal system in general, which is basically backed by violence at the end of the day. In blockchains, right now at least, there is no such thing, and they kind of try to create their own norms and own system, which may have some economic incentives, but it's like all voluntary. And if there is any attacker who is playing by the rules or even kind of breaking the rules, there is no way to force him to stop. You just can kind of motivate him economically to stop, because you will design the system in a way that is profitable for him to actually obey the rules and not break them. But that may not be the case all the time.
So just to follow up what Vlad said, so I think it's very important to note that governance in corporate settings defined by shareholders, legal agreements, governance in governments defined by citizenship, which is ultimately resting in violence, but also in kind of all-encompassing the large-scale identity systems, numbers to identify citizens, to make sure they can double spend their vote. These are all very old technology, and the problem is we haven't really seen a revolution in governance for since essentially the foundation of nation states, the Treaty of Westphalia, and the sort of move to representative democracy, and in terms of corporate governance, there hasn't been like huge changes in corporate governance since essentially the first large-scale corporations, East India Company, etc., were founded. So what's really interesting about this moment we're living in now is that for the first time in like 100 or 200 years, we're existing in a global, interconnected world where people are trying to make very hard governance decisions, where the future of software, but also of millions, if not of either Bitcoin, depending on the price crash, but tons of money is at stake with real-world consequences, and we are still only now trying to understand how to make essentially what a what a governance system means on a global scale. And my personal theory is that rather than copy the nation state or copy traditional corporations, that all the innovation in governance is actually going to be happening on the protocol level, both the internet and blockchain protocols, that what will happen on the blockchain and internet level will then reflect back into more traditional state-based and corporate-based governance structures.
I think you raised an important feature of state governance, which is that they are identity-based. And there is actually an endeavor in blockchains or in Ethereum to recreate the identity, something like decentralized identity, or I think the better term is reputation. So you can have like reputation-based governance. So what do you think about the reputation and governance? Maybe like voting by reputation.
I personally find that like anything where you have to say who are the participants and how much weight they get is something that I'm super concerned about, and I think is like basically inherently going to at least I don't know of any way to do that without disenfranchising participants in blockchain governance today, or a way that like doesn't create like instructions for how to capture the system, and so I'm kind of against this kind of single system-based blockchain governance where we just like follow the results of some program. But I wonder, and I want to ask Harry, like what you think is actually promising about blockchain governance versus corporate and traditional governance. Like a lot of people think that blockchain governance is broken and that traditional governance is better. Like why is blockchain governance anything to give us hope?
I think you can kind of look at the general shambles representative democracies in most nation states. There's not much hope in Trump in the United States, or the Brexit. I don't know what the Slovakian situation is. That's probably not very inspiring. And then in terms of, I would like to know. And in terms of, traditional corporate governance, just try to form a normal corporation. Then you have all the traditional power structures of the board and shareholders taking over and vesting, and it's a well understood game. But if you look at is there actually any innovation coming from a lot of these companies? Not really. A very small group. People do complain, and it's true about whales and whatnot. But but it's also equally true that corporations are, for the large extent, captured by fairly small groups of investors who then aren't really they're a bit risk averse. They find, and Silicon Valley has, I think, stopped producing any innovation. Some of that is not because there's not intelligent programmers working there. There's not people there who could do something. It's that there's a lack of vision, there's a lack of structure and organization around that vision. I just want to mention something about identity systems. I do think identity systems, the web, people kind of forget this. The web, the reason why you have cookies on the web is because when Tim Berners-Lee invented the web, he kept out an identity system. He made DNS for websites. You have IP addresses for things which have to send packets over the internet. But there was no human-facing identity system built on the web, both for scalability reasons, but also for general concern for who would be the authority which hands humans identity and how the rules of creating reputation work, and it seemed to be such a hard problem. People wanted to avoid it. And I do think that identity systems as such have a tendency not only to be inherently oppressive. Historically, they're used by nation states to control people, to label people, to prevent people from traveling, or make people pay taxes, or whatever they're doing. But also, an identity system attempts to establish a single identity on someone inherently does a large amount of very real violence to the human, to the person who may have very different kinds of identities in their lives and very different kinds of, who may actually only be more free and be able to be true to themselves when they're anonymous. And so I'm very against all these sort of corporate attempts to put on identity as such on the blockchain. I think it's a very dangerous and oppressive system. And The only people who seem to really want these systems aren't end users, the companies that are trying to make money off these systems.
I may have a reaction to your point about reputation being tied to some identity. I've read some researches like last year about some systems, decentralized reputation systems, which in that example used Monero to kind of stake, as a stake for people who have some level of reputation. As a person, you basically you do business with someone and you then convince them to stake some of their Monero in the system to your reputation. You can do the same to them, and whoever has a high amount of Monero staked behind him, he kind of can show his view key to someone else, and this is proof of his reputation without it being public to anyone. And then I don't know the details, but it should work in a way that when something happens that you breach some contract, this Monero which you have staked behind your name would be used to cover the damages you did. So it was 2 or 3 researches. I've seen them last year, and I was wondering if there will be some project actually materializing it. An ICO, but nothing like that happened. So it exists in theory, maybe.
I do think this is kind of a tangent, but I think there's a big difference between identity systems and credentials and access control management in general. We have to manage credentials, manage our keys, make sure we have access, make sure we don't lose our keys, make sure that if we do lose our keys, that things will be fine, and all of that I think can be created to meet a lot of user demand for identity systems without a state system. But I think that we digress.
Someone might say that I would like to have an identity because I will receive some benefits from the state, from the redistributive mechanism. So that's maybe
why not some credentials that entitle you to something from the state? I find that credentials are normally enough. You can normally just replace the identity system with the credential access control system and achieve all of the goals.
Okay,
but we digress.
Yeah, I would second that. There's a difference between systems which give you certain capabilities, such as access to key material or access control to particular files or whatever, possibly a check from the government or a medical service. That you can have these kinds of credential and access-based systems. There's been lots of cryptographic research on them for 20 or 30 years without having to build a full-fledged identity system. The danger of identity systems, they try to take all of these systems, which is why they're often totalitarian and control-based. They try to merge all of these various aspects of life and all these different things you need access to and all these things you need credentials to. They try to make sort of master key or master identifier for them. Just as your passport sort of serves as a master identifier for you to travel, I think that's actually very dangerous for the crypto space. We need to have customized, domain-specific credential systems which can be anonymizable, which aren't necessarily linkable to the person using them and can be even transferable.
As the guy here said, he said that governance or government is a system of management. For example, it could be resources or certain activities for a society, common functions that need to be done at the society. Another part of governance is also the setting of long-term strategy, and a lot of these discussions about how it will implement governance or the management of people inside of a system, I think really come down to the root of what is the driving purpose of the system, because the form of how the system function is dependent on that. For example, if an environment is chaotic and constantly changing, it becomes difficult to think in any kind of strategical long-term perspective. The focus shift onto kind of a short-term tactical level, and that's when authoritarian models have more success. But if we're talking about we want to establish some new kind of societal paradigm, there has to be some level of coordination, but at the same time, we're looking within that model to establish a different form of societal life. And for example, after major extinction events, usually it's our selected species who are very generic that can quickly take over like a landscape because they can like exploit all of the niches. But then after some time, it's like more specialized species who can like come and they can like more better exploit those niches and make better use of those resources. So in terms of like the vision of society that we want to create, there's like a danger that we fall into trying to create these like monolithic megasystems which don't take account for like geography or like local variances, and instead we need to be thinking about like how do we empower individuals to like solve problems in their local context, and so before we start to talk about like what is the form of cryptocurrency, we used to say, okay, what is the purpose of cryptocurrency? And when we're talking about what is the purpose, we're trying to solve a problem, and that problem is start from okay, like what is our analysis of what is the problems of the society that we see? You know, like what is our proposal for that? And that narrative become like a driving force for organising all the different like arms of the community to work effectively to solve that problem. Because the problem is now in cryptocurrency community there is this really powerful narrative about blockchains, which is like attracted, and what I think is the true wealth of this movement, which I don't think is blockchain or this or that thing technique. I think it's all of the really young idealistic people who have huge amounts of capital and are really technically skilled. That is a really valuable resource, you know, like something extremely powerful. It can be mobilized. But what's happening now is that there's a lot of all these micro projects and micro fiefdoms where everybody's kind of like trying to climb to the top, and people just end up drifting from project to project until they kind of just gravitate slowly towards these like big corporations like Consensus. They're now like making moves on the blockchain space. So all this discussion about governance is like, how do we stop that happening? And I feel like a lot of that is just reactive. It's like there's like a problem, we're trying to like patch the problem, and the same thing come down to like identity or any of these kind of systems. I think like really the like fundamental like task of like the crypto community now is to kind of like develop a vision of the society, like a positive vision of the society that can kind of like be a driving focus for people to move towards. You know, like what is the type of society that we want to see? You know, like what is the and what is the role that technology will play in that kind of society? And what is the type of individual that we want to create? What is the ideal type of human being? Like what does freedom actually mean? Is freedom simply that I cannot be told what to do, that I'm without limits? Or is freedom actually something else? Is it like, you know,
what kind of governance model we think that is a good one? Because
well, if we look in today's
in connotation with the blockchains.
Yeah, well, if we look in today's society, the dominant paradigm that we live in is a bureaucratic legal mechanism. And
does that apply to blockchains as well?
Well,
the governance of blockchain, is it evolving in the same way?
This conversation opened with like, how is blockchain different from classical governance? And I don't think that blockchain is that different. I think it has its own peculiarities and characteristics, but like on a fundamental level, the like knowledge base about like how blockchain is governed, and even like draws like a lot of like knowledge from like history itself of like human societies. In fact, government itself is a type of technology. It's like a technology that is mechanizing human beings to like perform like tasks in the society through rigid system of specialization. Now, if you take a bureaucracy, the bureaucracy is a very efficient, can be a very efficient way of performing some activity, because you set an objective. Each of the human beings inside that organization have a different speciality and a different role, and you can use metrics to kind of like measure and like to kind of like tweak the thing so it more efficiently reaches its goal. The problem with bureaucracies is that separation from the wider society, together with like the power and the concentration of wealth, create like a mild form of insanity inside of people. And sometimes like bureaucracies can so efficiently meet their goal or objective that there's like really deleterious like side effects in the wider society, and the actual goal itself needs to be changed. Like it needs to be like a shift of strategy. So if in terms of like blockchain we're just thinking, okay, what mechanism can we put in place that will be like perfect for like all of eternity, then we kind of like might fall into this trap. Like the world around us is we're like actually shifting like globally, like geopolitically, from like a unipolar world, which is like defined by like Western liberalism, into this like new like chaotic environment with all these like post-nationalist, super-religious forces that we simply don't have a handle on, we can't comprehend on any deeper level, and the power of prediction has actually lost itself. And the real question is about how can the community be able to effectively organize to be able to respond to this dynamic, changing environment around it.
If we compare Bitcoin governance to Ethereum governance, is it
Bitcoin actually, Ethereum is actually a lot better in terms of having a vision and being able to respond to challenges in the world than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has become extremely conservative. They really faces the risk of its own death.
In that conservatism in Bitcoin governance, what is interesting, there are some more radical viewpoints about Bitcoin governance, and in particular hard forks, that Bitcoin should hard fork for a few more times and then never ever. So it should be stable as it is, without any change for the future.
Sure.
What do you think is that good way how to?
It could be good. Further? It might not be good. It depends on the circumstances. There might be a circumstance in the future that we can't predict. But the question is it's more than actually the core technology itself. People see Bitcoin as this object, which is transcendent, almost like a god, and it never changes. But the actual fact is technology changes constantly. All the minor technical decisions are value decisions we make between one choice or another. And the fact is technology does accumulate technical debt over time.
So what do you think?
Well, what I'm trying to get at is the question of narrative, the question of the ideology that is driving.
We might have a question from the audience, right?
I would like to ask Amir. I'm not quite sure if I understood correctly the thing you were talking about, but it was more about what should be the fundamental design or purpose of the blockchain as a governance tool. But do you think that right now we kind of have the better of all evils? Instead of having, for example, if all the developers were focusing only on Bitcoin, which would be great intellectual power to support it. But as you said, there never will be a perfect governance model for each individual. Therefore, we will have to prefer collectivism. So isn't it right now better that we have so many different projects with disputable security, but for the model, we have so many different projects, and each of them will probably differ in some way. So people will maybe never have the perfect governance model, but will have a lot more to choose from.
Yeah, thank you. I really think that we need to learn from history, especially the history of the open source movement. There's all this wealth of knowledge that we're not drawing on now, and people are repeating the same mistakes. What happened with Linux? What happened with open source? We had dozens of desktops, all of them pretty much useless, dozens of text editors, dozens of calculator apps. We didn't have one decent video editing application. A video editing application is a difficult piece of software to make. It requires coordination between a team of people, all splitting the tasks up between themselves. And there were a lot of people that were very motivated to work on free software. They entered into the community. It was okay, what should I do? They didn't know what to do, so they just went and they made another calculator. And that was a wasted opportunity. No offense to Vlad, but if you are an Ethereum developer and you're every single day on the mailing list, day in, day out, for years, participating in technical decisions, you do get some kind of separation from your wider community. And now there's all this newer, younger developers who kind of want to enter into the community, and they're just facing this massive technical wall that's almost impenetrable. It's where do you even start with all this stuff? A lot of this stuff's not even documented. So that's why a lot of them just end up gravitating towards who has the money, who is bigger, who is more established, and that's a loss. And I'm saying that there's a quote from Occupy movement. Occupy was horizontal and decentralized. And the fact is, some people always have more charisma than others. Some people have more money. Some people have more initiative. They have more capability to get things done. And that kind of system can become hierarchical. The quote from Occupy was a young protester who said, "You know what's worse than an old elite who is concentrating all the wealth and power that we're fighting against, is a new elite that we can't see, that organises through social media, who doesn't even turn up to the assemblies." And that's essentially what's happening in blockchain now. You know, like you try to tell people there is an elite, there is a hierarchy in this space. Because, oh no, it's decentralised, it's a meritocracy. Well, the fact is, it's not as easy for people coming into space now to enter into the space as it was a few years ago when it was less established. When
you mean more like a knowledge-based elite, right?
Yeah, it could be knowledge-based, but also personal connections. You know, like, for example, myself, I was 2 years out of blockchain because I was in Syria, and coming back, you know, like, it was a lot easier for me to catch up just because I know key figures in the space, and I can go and talk with them, and they explain to me ideas, and I can grasp
in this problem, I think there is still a big gap in terms of untested ground in terms of blockchains. So I think there will be a very different blockchains in the future where you as a young developer can still catch up and be on the edge of innovation. Because, Harry, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I'll just say, but the thing I'm trying to get at is not a technical, okay, there is a technical aspect to it. Fundamentally, we're talking about humans and how humans are using the technology in this, like, arms race against regulators. Like, we want to defeat the state, we want to weaponize the technology, but fundamentally I come about, like, okay, how do we organise to build this ecosystem of technology? And it's not just about the core technology, but it's also the tools around it. Why has nobody built a black market place for selling drugs online, decentralised one, an effective one? Why has nobody built...
Open bazaar.
Pardon? But it's, yeah, I don't know if it's being used for that. And, you know, why is there not, for example, a decentralised anonymous wiki or decentralised anonymous project management software, or why is there not anonymous referendum systems?
These things are hard to build, and you know, the technology isn't really that usable and ready yet. I mean, that's my answer. I don't know if you guys have a different idea.
But if I may ask, what do you think is the main problem that these things are right now happening? It's the money that is pouring right now into crypto, or why is this so, like, knowledge bubble that people are, like, getting into this bubble happening?
You're saying why is this? Is it because of the money? Is it because why people being sucked into this bubble? Well, for example, with Bitcoin, with Bitcoin, it's kind of like there's like a sense that Bitcoin will succeed no matter what, and we don't have to do anything. It's an inevitability, and it's almost become like a religion. I'm saying there is no linear trajectory to history. It's something that we have to push, and that means, like, we have to actually think. And this is something actual Bitcoin developers have told me, is that Bitcoin is finished. We just need to tweak it and keep it stable. That for me is, if that is what the leadership of Bitcoin is saying, what we have to understand is the developers are kind of like this proletariat worker class, and you've got like these business guys who are trying to get them to do stuff, and the developers like have their own will, and they try and get them to do stuff with like money. And in the beginning of Bitcoin, there was this kind of like business class who was trying to like capture Bitcoin, and they had like charisma, but they were also a bit scammy. And we managed to organise to like overthrow this business class, but what was left was like engineers took over. And the engineers have like a really particular mindset about things, which is like, oh, there's this problem, like how do I solve this problem? Everything's like really linear. So for them, they have like Bitcoin, they're like, how do we keep it functional? How do we keep it running? But like by its very nature, like if we want to like go forwards, we have to accept some level of risk. You know, we need to engage we need to like engage with like the social aspect of the world. That's what sets our objective. And all the arms of technology, technological development come for satisfying that strategy. So it's a problem with the organization and the structure and the narrative.
Well, I would just like to add that for me, Bitcoin is more like a defensive technology. I feel that the movement of the Bitcoin core is driven more by like paranoia or fear. Like they really want to keep it as stable and as decentralized as possible in order for attacker to not be able to kind of dilute it or crash it or do anything with it which would be against this ethos. And maybe some other projects which then are like branching out of Bitcoin or even being created on their own. They are more like positively minded towards the future. They want to build stuff. They want to kind of create some new ways how we like do things in society, how we organize, and they kind of are a bit more reckless because they feel that they can afford it, and these attackers won't come after them that quickly, right? So for me, the main difference between Bitcoin and like almost all the other projects is like this mindset of the main goal of the Bitcoin is like defense, and main goal of like almost all of the others is creation of something new.
When you compare to Ethereum is, I guess, more progressive, and it's not so defensive, and it's more...
But also, we're not even close to where we want to be. We're nothing. And like people saying, oh, let's keep it steady, guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're... I just want to go to some of the questions that have been flying across from...
I mean, so what do you think could be the evolution of the Bitcoin? Like, what could it be?
Satoshi's original website says Bitcoin is peer-to-peer money that cannot be controlled by central banks and governments. So that there should be like a large-scale effort, not just to establish Bitcoin, but also to develop it as a black market technology. The head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, just released a report which said fight fire with fire. She said the danger of cryptocurrencies is that they can be used for money laundering and terrorist financing. And what they just showed us is their biggest fears. They just opened up a path for us to be able to resist against them. Money laundering is what? It's counter-economic activity outside the state. Terrorist financing is what? It's organizations that are not legitimized by the state. So they're saying that there is a danger of black capital being able to circulate freely throughout the world. Most of the developing world, that's another thing about these technologies. This you know, like I know I'm in Slovakia, but it's like Marx came up with this like new economic paradigm, and it wasn't people in the West who applied his ideas. It was people from other developing countries who came to the West. They learned about these ideas and they took it back to their own countries. The same thing is going to happen with all of these new economic models that we're creating.
Amir,
There's going to be people who are actually suffering, who are actually...
Sorry.
well, no, I'll just finish your point. People are actually suffering, people are in a war, people actually need this technology, they're going to adopt this technology and apply it to their country. It's not going to be rich white Westerners who already have credit cards, who are living okay lives. That's the real value of this technology. And most of that developing world is based off of paper currency. You go to developing countries, it's paper money they use, it's black market economic activity, which the IMF and the World Bank and the system of nation states doesn't like that. They want to stop that. That's why fundamentally this economic paradigm we live in is a system of injustice.
I'll just try to connect this to some of the questions coming out there. Real quick, we can go through real quick. So there's a lot. So
the first one,
as Amir said, the problem that we're facing strategically is that we're moving from this sort of very, stable world of stable nation states, general, slow but managed economic uptake. This very, kind of everything dominated essentially by the United States as the global police of capitalism. To a world which is very multipolar, very chaotic. We're seeing in Syria, for example,
nation states collapse, Arab Spring, nation state governments overthrown. We're seeing the sort of financial managers of traditional capitalism, the central banking system, the Federal Reserve, essentially are unable to control this environment. So you kind of have two options. One option is you say, well, look, we need to create a new kind of more perfect system. And prediction markets are really interesting, but prediction markets are, the problem of prediction is that prediction always generally assumes, unless you have some sort of secret information, that the future will on some level resemble the past or some portion of the past. So prediction markets tend not to work particularly well in sort of very chaotic systems. So I would say that prediction markets are interesting. I hope people keep working on them. But by nature, the whole nature of political reality is that things are very unstable, things will happen which you cannot predict, including prediction markets may help your predictions, but events ultimately are not always predictable. Tezos, I will skip.
Tezos, why? Tezos is actually the project which claims that they devoted the most time to governance, devoted the most thinking to, or at least this is what, from a high level, I'm catching. So, do you have any view on Tezos governance?
Well, I mean, they spend the most time claiming they've solved governance out of any project. Like, really, they do, for sure, spend the most time claiming they've solved it. And I think, like, in some way, they've solved it in the sense that they've, like, legitimized a system that everyone in the Tezos community is down to go with. And so they've solved it for themselves. However, like, should we put coin holders in charge of the protocol to the point where they can, like, push automatic upgrades to all nodes that follow the protocol? I mean, from my point of view, that means, like, making the blockchain owned by coin holders, and, like, puts us, like, squarely in this kind of, like, automated corporation governance model, where, like, the shareholders are king. And I don't think it's anything to be proud of. If anything, I think it's a huge liability for the whole blockchain space, because the possibility that we end up being owned by coin holders actually, I think, is, like, essentially failure. Like, I consider that to be like a failure mode of blockchain governance, where we're captured and controlled by a small number of dudes and investment funds.
Well, Tezos governance is have more tendency to go to on-chain governance. Yeah. So, for instance, they've got these developer incentives. You've got US developer have more incentive to develop Tezos than, let's say, Ethereum.
Well,
Isn't that better?
No, I mean, I don't think that's super clear. But the question of how people are paid is, like, related to the governance question. But the kind of main thing that Tezos does with their on-chain governance model is they identify a group of stakeholders who get to have, like, this kind of ultimate decision-making power, where, at least in the protocol, they get to upgrade the protocol almost arbitrarily. Like, they're starting to add restrictions so they can't create coins. But for the most part, Tezos really empowers coin holders. I mean, and the incentive system also is going to be actually much less flexible than the incentive systems that we know how to institute off-chain.
Maybe I can mention.
Yeah, okay.
Is that, I mean, so just in, maybe not, I mean, in their defense to some extent, and in defense of some sort of token-based or coin-based governance. So what I was trying to say earlier with prediction markets, and in general with nation states, is they're prediction markets work well, but like as Amir said, the situation is very, very chaotic. Nation states are melting down. They probably won't be here. They're definitely not going to be here in the same form that we have them now in probably 10 or 20 years. I'd be shocked. I mean, you never know. They've lasted a long time, but they were not always there. They will not last forever. However, one of the advantages that we have, and why is the blockchain space interesting? Because the blockchain space solved this fundamental problem. Like, I'm not a blockchain person. My background is in the Internet Engineering Task Force in the free software community. Internet Engineering Task Force is how we build protocols like TCP/IP, TLS, like these kind of old-fashioned protocols which are the backbone for a lot of blockchain activity. And these protocols were built not by voting. We didn't have very elaborate voting systems. They're built by sort of rough consensus, running code, sort of community efforts. But the fact of the matter is all of these original internet and web efforts were very easy for a small number of companies to capture. That's where we saw W3C pushing through digital rights management. You see even with TLS, internet companies asking for backdoors, essentially, in the encryption protocols. Luckily, the IETF pushed back and refused them all, but these are very dangerous situations we're in. And blockchain has, I think, a chance, not guaranteed, to prevent this from happening. In the open source community, what happened is the open source community was started out very healthy, very idealistic, but then what happened is a few companies took over, and then you think this person's working on open source, but actually they're just working for Google. Therefore, they won't use the GPL, they'll only use BSD. Or, for example, you think it's a great open source community-driven project, but then there's this sort of red hat behind it, basically, which gets bought by, God help us. Right? So we have these problems in the open source community, and a lot of those problems are based on the fact that it was impossible for people to get paid and survive without working for a large company in this space. Richard Stallman, who was the ethical genius behind the GPL, a coder like we haven't seen in generations, I used to work with him at MIT, and he's basically like a homeless guy living in his office. Every few years they try to physically drive him off. He just refused to go. But it was tragic that these people who contributed so much to the world in terms of running code that runs all these companies' infrastructure, that runs infrastructure we use every day, these people are basically they're like they said, they're proletarians. Their code was being exploited by other people. So I do actually support tokens, maybe not all the craziness going on with the on-chain governance space, but I definitely support somehow rewarding people for doing community-based work. Because that's something that was just missing, and it did lead eventually to a lot of corporate capture and control of traditional governance bodies, and it kind of led to the sort of slow death of the open source and free software community.
We have a question from audience.
I would just like to continue a bit with the idea of coin holder voting. I have an investment fund, so we kind of invest in a lot of these coins, and I think it can be also a problem that projects, like open source projects, have coins or tokens, and they kind of feel like shares of the open source project. If it was a company, it would have shares. It doesn't have a company, so we have a token. And all these coin holders usually, you have funds, you have all these big money players coming in, but also you have a lot of developers and early adopters holding the coins. And I don't necessarily think it's bad to have some kind of mechanism for them to get involved directly and to have a power, because they are the ones with a lot of skin in the game. And yeah, skin in the game is usually very great, good incentive to have when you do something on your own without any structure around you, formal structure. But also, I just question if Ethereum didn't have any coins, if it was some kind of open source project without it, who would still be in the space? Who would be the main drivers if it were a bit different, or if the structure was completely different than it is now? The coin in the project changes a lot of things, and yeah, I think when we assign a coin to some project, we are changing everything, and this is where it all starts. I don't think it should start with asking who should have the vote. It should start with asking if the coin is already not distorting the incentives we have if we want to build some public goods, some better future, and then we have some kind of traded asset which can increase in price sharply, and all these funds, all these people neither actually want to buy it just to increase the price of the tokens. And basically, if I get the right to vote on some project, I will usually vote for the thing that I believe will increase the price of the token. So, not sure if it's really good to have it in the first place.
If it's righteous or just economical activity behind it, right?
Ruben?
Yeah, sorry, just want to ask, so just on kind of going back to the kind of governance and technology, I mean, with the technology that exists now in cryptocurrency and blockchain, if you had carte blanche, kind of Terra Nova, create a nation state from the ground up, what are some of the features and what are some of the concerns that you'd include and exclude, I suppose?
just say very quickly that I don't think it's a good idea to recreate nation state on the blockchain.
It will fail, I think.
The conception of the state that I have is that we can like use the archetypes from a tribal society of the priest, the war chief, and the elder, and each one of these the priest represent the ideology, the war chief represent the military or the police, the use of force, and the elder represent like the administration or the scientific knowledge, which is a way of like regimenting society and separating human beings as objects in a mega machine. So when we talk about we want to defeat the state, it's like how do we stop this system of power which dominate human beings over our thought, with physical force, and through the use of incentives and rewards. So I do think that if for example I'm living in a forest and I'm clothing myself, I'm keeping myself warm, I'm feeding myself, I'm like taking care of all my needs, there's no state involved in that. I'm a free, autonomous human being. But we don't live in a forest, we live in a civilization. We live in a system of material production. The things we're wearing like watches and phones, they're made in factories by human beings doing a mechanical task repeatedly. And that human being in the factory, he's not a free human being, he's not a fully actualized, potentialized human being. But what we can think about is like how do we still get some of that benefits of that material civilization while allowing human beings to develop their autonomy, their sense of self, and where there is like a necessity for centralized infrastructure, for example, industry or telecommunication, things where there's like economies of scale, what kind of like mechanisms can we put in place to allow the people who are shareholders in that system to be able to have a say in how that system is run or managed. So in terms of that paradigm that we want to create, I do think that the role or the structure of how the institutions are created have like a role in fostering like a different kind of society. It's like through engagement in politics, human beings, by engaging with other people in a political process, they start to understand that there are other needs in a society. They start to understand how to engage with people on a common level, to like negotiate, to foster like a common will. So the actual structure of society changes the nature of human beings, and that's something that's lost in the system that we live under today. The system that we live under today have the assumption that humans have like pre-political desires, and that the role of the system is simply to like negotiate to give people little spheres or sections of freedom, and the result is that like human being will never ever be able to like aspire to like anything like greater, like be an expression of some greater will. So it's like, how do we recreate that society or that fabric that has been like lost from like the very beginning of human history, like where the world is like magical and poetic. So the technology, so it's more about like what role can the technology play in the world, and about the tokenization of the technology and how open source really lack that. I remember like when I was a teenager, somebody said to me that there's this thing called Linux, and I didn't know what it was. I said, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, "Oh, well, on your computer you have like Windows. You can actually change that. You can put other kinds of software on your computer." And that for me was a revelation. And he said, "Yeah, not only can you do that, but you can also. It's also a piece of technology that's made by people all around the world." And I found that incredible that this was the new economy, but like in the internet. And I went on and I started to read about the free software movement, and I found the manifesto of Richard Stallman. And in it, Richard he said that it's not inevitable that technology have to get captured by the state and by corporations, but actually technology has a liberatory potential, and that we can actually create our own type of technology for us that empower human beings.
But I think if you watch the 90s, the beginnings of the internet, there was the very same actually emotion driving the early stages of the internet, that internet is going to liberate quite a lot of people. And if we see right now what happened, a lot of actually dreams in the beginning did not come true. And I think that this is the very same emotion right now in blockchains, but I don't see any way how it would actually be different right now, because well, ultimately we have decentralization on the software layer, but you know, the cables are physical, so the state can push the blockchain movement in similar way how it pushed the internet itself.
Yeah, so when I discovered free software movement, I found it something extremely compelling, and I decided, okay, I want to devote myself to this thing. I want to help realize this vision, and for the next like 6-7 years of my life, I was working just on free software with like other idealistic hackers, and it was extremely difficult. You know, like we were living in like occupied houses. You know, we were going and getting the food from the skipping, dumpster diving. You know, we had no money. At the end of this 6 years, there was like one big project that finally we had. It was for 32,000 euros between a group of 8 developers, and we were so excited about this 6-month project. This was like the culmination of everything. And eventually, the project just broke down completely, and I had this kind of moment where I said, "Okay, it's been 5 years like working on this. 5 years, and I have nothing to show. I have no money. I have no education. I have no result from my work. Why am I doing this? Why am I punishing myself?" And that's when I decided that for the next 2 years of my life, I'm just going to go and make money. I'm going to become a poker player, and so on. And it was really tough. It was really difficult. It was really, and not many people are like that. You know, like not everybody is able to make that level of sacrifice for their ideals.
Do you think that blockchains will end up the same as early internet?
Well, it's not given, but there is like a choice that we're facing, and I think the choice fundamentally comes down to what happened with the free software movement, where Richard Stallman came in the beginning, and he gave a very strong vision of like how we should organize. Like if you actually read the GNU Manifesto, it says, you know, this is a software we've created, this is software we're creating, and this is what we're going to create, and this is how it's all going to fit together. But then after the emergence of Linux in the early 90s, it started to progress into like making graphical desktops. And Stallman had like an opportunity to start to like, you know, like try and give some kind of like structure or institutionalize this movement. But he kind of just took a hands-off approach, and he said, oh, you know, now it's up to you guys. And then we saw like KDE and GNOME and XFC and all these different desktops. And the free software movement wasn't able to form itself into an actual proper organised movement, and it kind of just fizzled out, and it got captured by these corporate guys, which was the open source movement, like Red Hat, Google. And so that's fundamentally how the ideals were lost from the free software movement. Richard Stallman saw what was happening in the 80s, and he said to people, he saw how this group of idealistic hackers were being taken over by this huge influx of money. He came and he said, look, it doesn't need to be this way. We can build our own free software operating system. We can build our own operating system. People thought he was crazy, but he didn't listen to reason. He went off and with determination against all the odds, he went and built that thing.
Okay, and then
if we're talking
about the free software.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons we can learn.
Building free software, there was this good question.
Wait, let me finish the point. I just finished the point quickly. There was the emergence of the free software movement in the early 90s, and then Richard Stallman took like a step back, and then the community wasn't able to form itself, this idealistic community of hackers, and there came this other movement which kind of just took like all the software being made by the free software hackers and made it into a product, like a product for people in the society to consume. They took capital and money from it, and all of the ideals were lost from the free software movement. And the end result was that Linux wasn't able to actually, we were saying year on year, this is going to be it. This is going to be the year of Linux on the desktop. We were sure of it. And then Mac came out of nowhere and just overtook Linux, and that was it. There was this final big push to redefine the Linux desktop completely. We're talking about like semantics and all of these things, and it was like this huge development effort, like literally like thousands of man-hours of development effort. And for what? Like a desktop cube and like special effects. It was completely useless. There was no fundamental analysis or like looking at the actual market outside. You know, it was like a bunch of developers who were lost. And what ended up happening is all of this idealistic community got taken over by Google, by Apple, by Red Hat, by all these big corporations, because they were able to organize as business entities. They were able to acquire capital, and they were able to analyze the market and set a strategy and develop software. And that's where the blockchain community finds itself now.
Yeah, I mean, just to repeat what Amir just said, but try to emphasize a little bit that it's a choice point. Like, there's a choice facing the blockchain community, and this choice is exactly the same choice that faced the free software community. Also the choice that faced the internet, right? So the internet started out very liberatory, very dynamic, and then eventually became taken over by a few large corporations. And a lot of everyone's saying, oh, the internet's all turned evil, fake news. And to be honest, I think most of that is bullshit. I think it's blaming the internet, which still I think has remarkable liberatory potential. The ability to connect humans to self-organize across the world without nation-states and traditional governance models is, regardless of how it pans out, it's something that we haven't had in human history before. But what's happened is that not only large corporations, but nation-states are now becoming involved in the internet, weaponizing it. Cyber warfare is nothing different than traditional government propaganda, or, you know, which people had in Slovakia, which people had, you know, you've had it under the communist regime, now you have capitalist, neoliberal propaganda being thrown at you. And of course, it's not the internet's fault, it's the fault of nation states. And so the exact same question will face the blockchain community. The blockchain community is like at this same inflection point. And I think why you see these questions around voting is because what I think people are trying to preserve is saying, well, how can we use some technical mechanism to prevent this kind of nation-state or corporate takeover, where you have corporations just making the future of Bitcoin be a centrally banked cryptocurrency? Or how do you prevent the future of Ethereum just being gobbled up by Hyperledger and Microsoft, or God knows what is going on? And, you know, of course governments don't, you know, they don't, what makes you think governments care? Well, they don't care about you. Like Amir said, they're using you to optimize certain functions around stability, around profit, and, you know, and your data is just another way they're exploiting you. So they're not going, so what could you do? And I think that people don't know, and that's why you have these questions around on-chain, off-chain voting. I mean, personally, technically, on-chain is probably a bad idea. There's always sorts of weird compulsion attacks. And I don't know if we need to go through that all in complete detail, but people do need some structure, some way. This is a hard question, which I don't have, there's not a simple answer for, but I hope people here can generate it, to prevent the kind of corporate and nation-state control of the blockchain, which is clearly coming.
Just one question for me, like, who is the blockchain community really? I mean, it is like, I mean, you draw it like a clear lines between people who are us and people who are them, right? But let's say, like, I think it's very unclear where it starts and where it ends. If you have like president of some country who is really into blockchain, is he a part of the blockchain community then?
What?
Yeah, someone recently tweeted at me a good definition of being part of a community, and they cited some author, I'm sorry, I don't know who. They say that communities are people who participate in shared narratives. And I thought that was pretty cool. That was like the best definition I've heard. But I don't know if it's like if it says that's like sufficient criteria. It seems necessary. There's many blockchain communities, and there is like the broader blockchain community.
Yeah, also those guys, they're tools that we should use to increase human freedom. The corporate government types.
if we want to increase human freedom, that's like values. Like what do we want to see in society or in our community? So there lies the fundamental question, like what we ought to fight for in blockchains. Like what kind of values we should actually push. How the blockchain should look like.
So there is basically this strong, like in Bitcoin mostly, like this big libertarian movement, like Austrian economic school, which kind of pushes for like individual freedom in the face of government. So maybe this is the one, but it's like if I am a socialist, let's say, which I'm not, but if I was, is it like I want to kind of optimize for equality as opposed to like individual freedom? Is it space in blockchain for me as well, or do I have to like kind of create my own blockchain where I will have I don't know, universal basic income and mechanisms like that, or
well, there are two differences even between Ethereum and Bitcoin, because Bitcoin is deflationary and Ethereum has some kind of an inflation which is not so Austrian kind of economic. So there is this difference in values which are already on the blockchain. So there could be even you can push it even further, like being full-blown collectivist or full-blown socialist, and this would be the values that you would design a blockchain for. So
I don't think the monetary design of different cryptocurrencies is really that important in like the setting of like core values. I mean, yeah, you have like infinite amount of ether, but it kind of decreases quickly, so it still behaves kind of deflationary after some time. So.
Anyone got any thoughts on the concept of liquid democracy? Right, that's kind of a hot topic, right?
Yeah, it is because.
Yeah, no, I'm just interested to know.
I mean, liquid democracy as a hot thing far precedes, of course, the blockchain community. The first time I encountered it was the Pirate Party in these communities. And essentially, their vision was that we would use sort of online voting and decision-making to decide how the party works. And you're seeing some of these concepts be resurrected now from both extremes, from the left and the CIDM in Barcelona and the Democratic Socialists of America talking about using liquid democracy to make sure that their representatives in the United States actually follow the will of the people. And you're also seeing a lot of people who are very involved in liquid democracy also being very involved from a more kind of, I would say, classical Austrian economic standpoint, being very involved in all the blockchain discussion, around blockchain governance. So the concept of liquid democracy, I think, is obvious, which is that technology can help us make political decisions. And I absolutely detest cryptographers like Matt Blaze and other people who basically say, well, you know, governance, we can never do anything really serious with technology and governance. We're just, you know, we've made this voting ballot system. We have these chads. This is the best we can do. And this is exactly, you know, what got us Trump. And I think this is truly this schizophrenia in the, like, I would say, older cryptographic voting community, who's done a lot of really good work. People should definitely read about mixnets and how mixnets can anonymize voting systems. There's been tons of excellent work, so much has even been deployed in places like Greece. But push comes to shove, there's a lot of cryptographers who are much older have basically given up and said, well, you know, voting how we do it today is the best we can do it. And that's obviously stupid. That's why they say, oh, well, we can't believe that people rejected Clinton and therefore the Russians had to hack our election. You know, it's a paranoid conspiracy theory, I think. I think the real thing is that we have to go beyond voting and ballots. Voting ballots is incredibly disempowering. It has nothing to do with real involvement, real commitment, you know, making code, being part of a community. It's just a little kind of almost religious game we play every few years to get us some, you know, the same neoliberal leader voted in and again over and over and over, just slightly different varieties. The problem of liquid democracy, which is why it kind of fizzled, is that very few people had the time to participate. The tools were not very easy to use. They were kind of catastrophically bad to use. Now, what empirical studies of liquid democracy showed, which is very interesting from a Bitcoin perspective, is that, yes, it was heavily dominated by a few geeks, However, those geeks tended not to operate in a classical self-interested way, but they tended to try to channel the greater needs of the community and other people pretty well. And things like quadratic voting ended up, push comes to shove, working out fairly well, much more well than people predicted in liquid democracies. But the problem is, again, we don't have enough people working on these tools. It's not just like getting lost in the mathematics of the perfect voting scheme, because there probably isn't a perfect voting scheme. I don't really support voting as a way of making decisions at all, to be honest. But I definitely support people working on making better user interfaces and exploring the boundaries of how we can use technology to make better political decisions. Because obviously what we have now with the nation state is catastrophic.
We have a question from...
Well, you asked a question about what would the ideal blockchain look like.
Yeah.
I think the ideal blockchain would be something that was extremely fast and small, that could even run on our mobile phones, and would be completely anonymous. And that should be like a general direction that we should be researching in. And also, maybe there is like a potential to design like a blockchain system with like a more limited form of smart contracts that can be like more performant. That's just like a hunch or a guess.
So is Monero the way?
No. Good try though. Yeah, I actually love to address this question also about like we should be striving for. We kind of spend a bunch of time saying like, oh, we shouldn't get captured by corporations or governments. Like that would be nice if we didn't get captured. We didn't talk a lot about what we want to do, other than support the black market. I think to me the thing that's interesting with blockchain technology is to create like new international institutions for coordination for solving global problems. And I think, I want us to do a lot of good with the blockchain for like the public on a global basis. And I kind of think, that like we should strive to be responsible with and for the blockchain, which is, kind of in some way contrary to Amir's, let's make it completely anonymous and free, because like I'm not sure actually. I mean, I kind of think that anonymous smart contracts, especially if you have like working oracles and like no ability to govern them, I mean, it's pretty scary. I mean, I believe in blockchain governance as a way to prevent abuse of the blockchain in a way that's like rather controversial in the blockchain space. So I'm just going to put that out there.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience we should ask.
Are we still doing a pizza break before the end of the panel? Or is it like the panel's going to be over and then we're going to have pizza?
Yeah, that's...
Okay.
If we are very hungry, we can
Go,
get
kiddo.
it and sooner.
How much time do we have on the time?
We have a few
Okay,
minutes
wait a
left,
second.
so
What I would say is what we should be working for is we should look into possibilities of using blockchain governance or ungovernance, not governance in traditional nation-state form, but some form of more direct
Virtual government?
democracy. No, that's not virtual. That's somehow embedded in how we can organize ourselves internationally in our life outside the internet. I think that is absolutely crucial. And the reason we need to do this is because there's 3 or 4 factors going on. One, we definitely have a giant ecological crisis coming down at us. And obviously the nation state cannot address this. And the traditional banking system cannot address this. 2, the nation state, we are in a chaotic state where it is slowly moving from this unipolar American world to a multipolar world. And 3rd, the rise of artificial intelligence is actually very interesting. And what you're seeing is that because people are seeing larger and more social instability coming down the road, that there's massive investments in machine learning to create more socially stable societies, which are essentially a very new version of totalitarianism and control, which I think everyone should be very concerned about. And I think the best bet we have is bottom-up, some form of governance, which will probably have some form of blockchain involved. The precise details haven't been quite worked out. I'd actually like to know Amir's thoughts on the coming civilizational crisis.
Well, I wanted to say about the you mentioned Dissident. In Barcelona, there's all these anarchists who basically got frustrated running vegan cafes and bicycle repair shops, and now they've started to get into local politics, and they managed to take over like the local councils of different areas. And they also have like a technological wing as a part of their organised activities. And when you go to their conferences or their events, and they're talking about the technologies that they're creating, it's really, really old stuff. You know, like we've made a web platform where people can like vote on stuff, and it's really basic stuff. But the fact is, they're applying the technology like widely throughout Catalonia, like literally like thousands of local city councils where people are like actively making decisions on this stuff. And it doesn't matter how good our technology is if people don't use it. So there's that like aspect of like, how do we organize to like seed these concepts in the society, and how do we do that as a community? And what were you asking? You were asking what is the
multipolar world?
yeah, there's a fundamental conflict in the heart of Western civilization between something which is based off of science, which is based off of like material or exchange of like science, versus like a culture which is like older, which is more durable, which is symbolic. And for example, in Iraq, there was this second biggest city of Mosul, which was protected by 10,000 Iraqi soldiers who had all the latest weapons from America, all the training, all the vehicles, all the equipment, everything. And literally 100 ISIS guys came, like 100 guys who literally want to die for what they believe in, and all the soldiers just ran away basically. They're just there to collect a paycheck, and that's fundamentally, and it's not just about like ISIS and Europe, but also like even Russia itself. Like Russia, now there's every so often the Western military is trying to analyse like why is Russia being so successful. For example, last year America spent $70 billion on their military, whereas Russia has spent $7 billion on their military. The budget for the American military is increasing year on year, whereas Russia's military budget is decreasing. The Western military, they keep trying to analyse the Russian military and going, what secret technique do they have that we can kind of take it and we can just throw loads of money at it and like overpower Russia. The latest thing they're talking about is hybrid warfare, that they have this like mixed tactical teams of people working together. But the real fact that people are missing is that Russia in the 90s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, was in a massive crisis with skyrocketing rates of like alcohol and AIDS, and a military that was disintegrating, an economy that was literally getting taken by oligarchs, and how Russia now is starting to pull itself out of that. For example, they've completely outplayed America in Central Asia, and they're winning in the Middle East. There is something, it's not just about like how much resources that the society has, it's something like inside of that, something like beyond that. And the Russia that I went to this year is very different to the Russia I went to in 2004. Like everywhere you see the symbols of Orthodox religion like being reinstated, like people are converting to Christianity. There's a transformation happening in the society itself. And you see the same thing happening, for example, in Iraq, where how Iran is conducting its foreign policy and basically now taken over the Middle East is really smart. America thinks that it controls the Iraqi government. It's saying, we pay money, like we're the ones that, are in charge, we're like the bosses. But Iran doesn't try to overthrow governments, they try to infiltrate governments, they build parallel structures within the states. Now in Iraq there's 50,000 militia that pledge allegiance to the Iranian government that aren't under the control of the central government. You know, there's something like in the West it's kind of difficult for us to understand. I don't know about Slovakia, it's more Eastern Europe, but certainly in a country like England, like where, you know, when you go to school, in the school you're taught to do the work, to get good grades, to pass the exam. You know, they're not teaching you how to be like a complete human being or to be like a free human being. They're not instilling in you like a body of values or ideas. And what's happening now is this big wave of migration of Muslims coming from the East who they actually believe in something. They believe in Islam versus like Europe who no longer believe in nothing. Like there's nothing holding our societies together anymore. And that's fundamentally the conflict that we're facing at the heart of civilization. New upstarts like Russia, like Islamic movements, neo-nationalist movements, neo-Christianity. You see also the Hindu nationalists, you know, and they just can't be tempted by capital, you know, or self-interest. There's like concept of sacrifice in that society.
So do you think that Europe will be similar to Middle East in terms of beliefs or values in the future?
The Western, now they're trying to do something about it. I just saw that they announced that the EU, they're going to institutionalize a national army of the EU. That's really fucked up. It's simply because it's like what happened in England. You know, there's all this liberal elite in their ivory towers, and you know, like one day they just woke up and they suddenly say, oh shit, people actually supported Brexit, people actually want to leave the EU. And even people I know that call themselves anarchists, they support the EU, they support being a part of the EU. It's like, how can you call yourself anarchist and want to be part of this bureaucratic superstructure of the European Union? The same thing happened in America, like a whole bunch of people, they can't comprehend like the actual crisis at the heart of the society, like what is happening. Like in England now, if you want to buy a butter knife, not the real knife, the butter knife that you use for like spreading butter on your toast, you have to show ID that you're above the age of 16. There's a massive spiral in the rate of knife crime. And the government doesn't know what to do about it. The only response they have about that is to become more authoritarian. London now has the highest number of CCTV cameras in the world. It's like a pressure cooker that's literally boiling. There's like with the wave of immigration now, there's all these Somalians who they're literally like hardened by like desert warfare. And when these Somalian drug gangs, they make like a move on like the turf. You've got like these like white boys who are like selling like a bit of marijuana on a street corner, and then there's literally they just come to like a fight with like maybe one of those flick knives, and these Somalians come with like machetes and just knife them up and like take over an entire area. And it's really like these like biological strains that have been like bred in like harsher conditions and are like migrating away to like the centres of like wealth and capital. And it's just not a sustainable model. Slowly, like Emmanuel Wallerstein, world systems theorist, he conceptualizes the world as this kind of like network with like a core and a periphery of nations. And this was like a network that was like sustained by people like Henry Kissinger, who like made like America maintaining the balance of power. But slowly, like nations on the periphery are starting to realize actually this system is not in our benefit, and they're slowly starting to organize amongst themselves to like oppose this unipolar world order. It's just not a sustainable world order. At some point, it could be 10 years, it could be 100 years. Something has to give. And what is really interesting is that our political system is based off of ancient Rome. All the concepts like dictator, senate, republic, they all are terms that came from ancient Rome. And the same phenomena that saw the decline of ancient Rome is exactly what we're seeing today. People think that the barbarians going into Rome were people that were attacking Rome. No, they were people that were just going to live in Rome. They wanted like a piece of the pie. In fact, Aldric, the guy the first barbarian who sacked Rome, he was actually a general in the Roman army. And the reason why he led his rebellion against Rome is because he was passed up for a promotion. He spoke Latin, and he was actually a Roman himself, pretty much. Phenomena like, for example, an overextended military, an overextended and undisciplined military, debasement of the currency, tourism was something that was invented in Rome. Romans, there was something that was lost from their society. They started to travel to ancient Egypt to like marvel at the spiritual wonders, kind of like hippies who go to India now to like rediscover something that's been lost in the West. And also, funnily enough, there's also, with the decline of civilizations, there's always the phenomenon of celebrity chefs. People end up looking, like, oh, we used to be great. Was it our music? Was it our art? Maybe it was our cooking that made us great. But it's fundamentally when that core of values, that moral fabric in the society begin to break down, and it no longer offers us like a way to deal with the issues of the world. Like fundamentally, like science is a way of like reducing the world down to like a phenomena that we can examine, we can gain instrumental knowledge about. But there is a whole body of human experience, like the intuition, that we can't understand through scientific experimentation. The problem with our political system is it reduces everything to what is empirical, and it's ignoring all that other aspect of reality, which is belief. And that's fundamentally crippled us to be able to comprehend this entire other world that's been slowly growing outside of our worldview. Fundamentally, the Western worldview is breaking down. It no longer offers us the way forwards. It's kind of like in the Soviet Union, people who were living in the Soviet Union, they knew that what they were being told on TV was very different from what they were living in. But because they didn't know any other reality, they just kept up the pretense of what they were living in. It was like they were so embedded as a part of the system, it was impossible for them to imagine anything different. And there was a Soviet writer, he called this hypernormalization. And it's not that we live in the same system as the Soviet Union, we live in a very different system, but we do live in a kind of reality where we see around us that a lot of this is fake, a lot of this is not real, but we can't imagine anything different. We can't imagine a different way to live, so we just continue to go forwards. And that's not going to, that's not sustainable.
Well, I think it's similar than in ancient Rome, like the peak consumerism was the precedent of the fall of the Rome. So if we take that analogy towards nowadays, maybe we are at a similar point in the history, but we'll see in coming decades. Maybe it won't be in our lifetime or in the further, but I would like to...
Sorry, I just had one point, but I'm not trying to say this as like, it's a terrible thing. It's also an opportunity for us to exploit. If we have a consistent vision of the world, we're organised, we can make use of that when that opportunity comes along. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to kind of get back to the main topic, which is like blockchain governance and crypto anarchy, to remind you. It kind of feels that right now there are like two streams of thought in like blockchain and crypto in general. One is revolutionary, like let's break the old system or wait for it to collapse and then like build something new on top of it or on top of the ruins. And then the other is more like let's cooperate with the old system, let's like build blockchains in corporations and in government, and let's kind of build a bit better system like in an evolutionary process. But if I understand crypto anarchy correctly, crypto anarchy was about neither of those things. It was more about like let's ignore the old system, let's just kind of build some new ways how to bypass it, how to go around it, how not to really be trapped in the old system, but without caring about it anymore, without caring if it thrives or if it fails. So I kind of feel that this third option of crypto anarchy is being a bit forgotten right now, that we either have these like revolutionary zealots or we have these corporate crypto guys who just want to build things like together with corporations and state.
Just want to get the money from ICO.
So I just want to kind of get back to the crypto anarchy side of things. Like, do you guys believe that crypto anarchy, with its goals of bypassing the system and create something parallel, something which doesn't rely on the old system but doesn't even rely on it failing, could work, or is it the way forward right now?
Matej, thank you for the last question.
Well,
I would like to end.
I invite people just to read the Crypto Anarchy Manifesto. The Crypto Anarchy Manifesto is not saying, oh, we're going to withdraw to this dreamy technological dream world. It's calling for the overthrow of states through cryptography.
Guys, those questions are really good for the after party because we have a DJ lined up, which will start. We have a pizza, which is heated, and we got a lot of beer to drink. And all of those questions are really good to discuss in person or even continue within this format. But let's eat something and let's continue discussion with beers.
I just wanted to hear Vlad.
Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, Vlad.
No, it's okay. I mean, I agree with both of you. I don't know. I mean, I think of cryptocurrency and blockchains as a hedge or as an insurance policy, which just by existing actually puts pressure on the existing system to improve, for example, things like financial inclusion. And so I think that, you know, cryptocurrency and blockchain existing improves the existing system both through innovation, but also through just the pressure and the fact that now, excluding sectors of the economy from participating in the financial system wholesale is much harder. And I think that is like already a big win. And I think it's also kind of revolutionary, but I'm not advocating for revolution.
Guys, thank you again for participating. We're going to continue in this space for about another 2 hours, and after that, maybe we'll continue somewhere else. We'll see how the mood will go. Thank you.
Není to tak typický. Já jsem myslel, že momentálně. Ale... Čekaj, já vím, že $1 je dole, jakože o tom nepochybujem. Nie sam, policji, no nie? Tam odstawienia